Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Alexandria Center for Hellenistic Studies and Institute for Mediterranean Studies Neoplatonic lectures. Today, we are very happy to welcome a guest star whose talk will not be on Neoplatonic commentaries on Plato, but on Hermeticism in Islam. Marinos Sariyannis is a research director at the Institute for Mediterranean Studies of the Foundation for Research and Technology, and specializes in Ottoman cultural and intellectual history. He holds a PhD in Ottoman history from the University of Thessaloniki, and before coming to the IMS, he has been a lecturer at the Ionian University and at the University of Crete. He is a prolific author who has published, I think, a little bit more than 100 articles and papers and book chapters. And here are the titles of his most recent books. A History of Ottoman Political Thought up to the 19th Century by Brill, 2018. Perception ottomane du surnaturel, Paris, Le Serre, 2019. And The Horizons, Limits and Taxonomies of Ottoman Knowledge by Verlag, 2021. And Marinos is currently the principal investigator of the ERC research project GHOST, that is geographies and histories of the Ottoman supernatural tradition. So the full title of his talk today will be Hermeticism in Islam, from the Sabians of Harran to al-Suhrawardi. Marino, thank you very much for having accepted this invitation, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Irene, and thank you all for gathering here. Let me try first the, just a minute.
So you will try to share screen. I think you don't have a handout.
Yes, but I think I was a bit hasty. So is it? No, sorry.
Yes, we can. It is perfect.
No, because you are seeing the whole PowerPoint rather than its presentation, you see?
Yes, you can click on slideshow, which is in the middle. You see insert design, then slideshow, a bit on the left.
Yes, I know, but I have to share it as well. This is with the problem with.
Okay.
Now, are you
Yes.
seeing now the whole?
Yes.
The second?
Yes, everything.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, so sorry for this delay. First of all, let me apologize in advance because I'm not an Arabist, though I will speak on mostly on like one today, and also I'm not a student of Neoplatonic philosophy either. Irene was kind enough to describe my work, so you see that I'm a scholar of Ottoman culture and intellectual history. I ran into Hermes, into the Arabic Hermes, in the course of studying Ottoman esotericism. Although, of course, this was in the framework of the project Ghost about Ottomans and the supernatural. Of course, I already had some idea of Hermetism and of the Renaissance Hermes, mainly through Umberto Eco's Foucault's Pendulum, to be honest. In short, I may have something original to contribute concerning the reception of Hermetica in Ottoman times, but for the rest, for all the story of the medieval development of this Hellenistic and Roman tradition, I mostly rely on Kevin van Bladel's magisterial recent book, The Arabic Hermes, with some help from other works, of course. The most recent contribution to the Late Antiquity Hermes is Garth Fordham's book. I will try, however, to explore some further dimensions, not of Hermetism per se, but of Neoplatonic ideas recurrent in the Islamic philosophy of the late Middle Ages and beyond. So, I will begin with the Hellenistic and Roman Hermes, although probably most of you are already acquainted with the topic much better than I am. Hermes, or Hermes Trismegistus, a Greek name, Trismegistus, meaning thrice greatest, is the name given to the Egyptian god of scribes and of learning, Thoth, by the Egyptian authors of a bunch of Greek dialogues and treatises composed around the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era. Trismegistus is actually a long translation from Thoth's Egyptian title in Ptolemaic times, Megistos και Megistos Theos Megas, the greatest and greatest great god, probably to distinguish him from the Olympian messenger god, the one we also know as Mercury. Now, these texts, which form the so-called corpus Hermeticum, are further subdivided in two groups. In the dialogues, the so-called religio-philosophical Hermetica, Hermes is a teacher possessing divine wisdom revealed to him through contemplation, while in the treatises, or the technical Hermetica, he is a master of divination and occult techniques, from astrology to talismanic and from alchemical to medico-botanical theories, mainly pertaining to natural magic. Now, a short excursus on this term is not out of place here. We distinguish between natural or astral magic in contrast to demonic or ritual magic. Natural is magic based on the knowledge of the sacred correspondences of the natural world, uniting the astral with the terrestrial sphere. Whereas ritual magic, on the other hand, is based on the invocation of various types of demons and spirits through rituals, magic words and symbols and so forth. So the one is dealing with perceived realities, albeit secret, of this universe, whereas the second kind, demonic magic, deals with the supernatural element. It's no coincidence that these two types are also called in the European tradition Hermetic and Solomonic magic, respectively. Now, back to Hermes. This collection of texts, the Corpus Hermeticum, or the Hermetica, as they also came to be known, had a wide diffusion in the world of late antiquity. This diffusion concerned more than the original Greek texts. So translations into Coptic, Armenian, Middle Persian, Pahlavi, Syriac, as well as Latin were also circulating, and one has to study all of them to reconstruct the width and diffusion of these doctrines. After the expansion and domination of Christianity, Hermetic texts were forgotten but for their Arabic reception, of which I will speak soon. But the discovery of some manuscripts and their Latin translation by Marsilio Ficino, first printed in 1471, created a real craze in the humanist circles of Europe. Editions of the Greek texts followed from 1554 on, and the ideas of the Hermetic corpus were combined with those of the Christian Kabbalah and humanist Neoplatonism to form what we call Renaissance magic. So scholars of the late Quattrocento, such as Ficino or Pico della Mirandola, believed in the possibility of the human magus with overwhelming powers over the natural world based on the knowledge of its secrets. In their work, the world was considered a continuum in which human soul is capable of influencing its environment, since macrocosm and microcosm correspond to one another. In the origin myth of these doctrines, the Hermetic corpus offered an emphasis on a pristine philosophy coming from antediluvian times. Thus, Hermetic lore remained very popular in scientific and occultist texts throughout the 16th century, and its popularity started to wane only after the early 17th century. In 1614, the scholar Isaac Casaubon showed that the texts belong to the early Christian era, and a series of critic studies demonstrated their origin in the Roman Egyptian world. Now, what were these doctrines found in the corpus Hermeticum? Garth-Fowden, a prominent scholar of late antiquity Hermetism, summarizes them as follows. God is one and the creator of all things, which continue to depend on God as elements in a hierarchy of beings. Second in this hierarchy, after God himself, comes the intelligible world, and then the sensible world. The creative and beneficent powers of God flow through the intelligible and sensible realms to the sun, which is a demiurge around which revolve the 8 spheres of the fixed stars, the planets and the earth. From these spheres depend the demons, and from the demons man, who is a microcosm of creation. Thus everything is part of God, and God is in everything, his creative activity continuing unceasingly. All things are one, and the plenum of being is indestructible. Perhaps the most well-known text is the famous Emerald Tablet, or Tabula Smaragdina. This short text, first found in the Arabic tradition and subsequently translated into Latin in the 12th century, was supposed to be found by Apollonius of Tyana, another prominent figure of ancient wisdom, according to Late Antiquity and the Islamicate authors. He was supposed to have found it beneath Hermes' statue. Here is an English translation by no less a figure than Isaac Newton. "'Tis true without lying, certain and most true. That which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below, to do the miracle of one only thing. And as all things have been and arose from one by the mediation of one, so all things have their birth from this one thing by adaptation. The sun is its father, the moon its mother, the wind hath carried it in its belly, the earth is its nurse. The father of all perfection in the whole world is here. Its force of power is entire if it be converted into earth. Separate though the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, sweetly with great industry. It ascends from the earth to the heaven, and again it descends to the earth, and receives the force of things superior and inferior. By this means you shall have the glory of the whole world, and thereby all obscurity shall fly from you. Its force is above all force, for it vanquishes every subtle thing and penetrates every solid thing. So was the world created. From this are and do come admirable adaptations, whereof the means is here in this. Hence I am called Hermes Trismegistus, having the 3 parts of the philosophy of the whole world. That which I have said of the operation of the sun is accomplished and ended." So you may see that this is mainly an alchemic text. We will see something more about its creation later. Now, while the reference to the explanation of the name Trismegistus is probably due to the Arabic background, the text as a whole also summarizes the doctrines of late antique Hermetica. As Kevin Van Bladel remarks, whereas these ideas, combining monotheism with Gnostic elements and an obscure notion of heliocentrism, whereas these ideas were recurrent throughout the Mediterranean basin of the Roman times, what is special in the Hermetica is the idea about the human situation. In short, what I already alluded concerning the Renaissance Magus, the possibility of human power and control over the sublunary world through the knowledge of natural correspondences. Thus, the famous motto, "as above, so below," a modern paraphrase more or less of an expression found at the beginning of the Emerald Tablet, is somehow the quintessence of this philosophy, especially if one adds that man can handle below and thus influence above. So the sympathetic harmony between things celestial and terrestrial on the one hand, and the ability of the human agency to manipulate this harmony on the other, form the core of the Hermetic doctrines. What is equally important here is to note that Hermetic literature almost unequivocally presupposes that not all human beings are entitled to such knowledge, let alone its use for magical purposes. This sort of ancient wisdom is preserved from some enlightened mystics, who can decipher the obscure meanings and symbols of Hermes' texts, hence the modern term Hermetic. Thus, properly speaking, Hermeticism or Hermetism, if you prefer, can be associated with three different aspects of the tradition I described. Firstly, the corpus Hermeticum, that is, texts such as the Fabulous Emerald Tablet and other texts of either philosophical or magical nature that belonged to the Hermetica of late antiquity and pass on to the medieval Islamic world through Syrian translations. Secondly, the ideas contained in this corpus, even when they were not attributed to Hermes. So mainly that all things connect with each other, that ontological hierarchies of planets, stars, spirits, and angels or demons, metals, herbs, animals, etc., are interconnected, and that the universe can be controlled through magical tools using these hierarchies. And thirdly, the tradition of an ancient saintly or even prophetic figure called Hermes, often considered as three consecutive personalities, whose wisdom is preserved for the few. Enter now the Arabs. I suppose more or less we all know about the Abbasid project of the 8th and 9th centuries to promote the sciences by embarking in a huge translation project from Greek, mostly through Syriac intermediaries. What is perhaps not so well known is that this project did not involve only Aristotle's books on physics, logic, and ethics, but a major pillar of these translations concerned astrology and divination, drawing not only from Greek but also from Pahlavi Persian, Middle Persian of the Sassanid period, or even Indian sources. In this context, the corpus Hermeticum was also discovered. Supposedly, this was the work of the Sabian astrologers, or such came the tradition to be in the subsequent centuries. The Sabian astrologers, these were members of the pagan community of Harran, the Hellenistic and Roman Kare, a Syrian city now in southeastern Turkey, very near the Syrian border. The Haranian religion seems to have been based on a cult of stars, and the prominent member of the community was Thabit ibn Qura, who died in 901, a mathematician who emigrated to Baghdad to become an eminent translator from Greek and Syriac. By the 9th century, it seems that the Haranians themselves claimed that Hermes was the prophet of their religion. When in 830, the Caliph al-Ma'mun asked the inhabitants of the town about their religion, so as to see whether he could protect them or had to convert them, they claimed to be Sabians. Now, Sabians is an obscure group which is referred in the Quran. And also, sorry, yes, which is referred to in the Quran, which was to be protected. We don't really know who they were, but the Quranic Sabians. So the Haranians claim to belong to this community, so that they had to be protected as well. And also they declared that Hermes was their prophet when they were asked. It seems that the toleration of their religion by the Islamic authorities lasted well until the 11th century. We do not know what exactly this religion was. According to Michel Tardieu's hypothesis, a Platonic school may have lasted from the 6th to the 10th century in Harran, but it doesn't seem that this hypothesis really stands upon scrutiny. And neither can a Haranian tradition of Hermetica be confirmed. So, although this is quite attractive as a hypothesis, I'm afraid we have to dismiss Harran and its Sabians and move further. Now, to cut, to cut a long story short, in the mid-8th century, Iranian astrologers first introduced Hermes into Arabic knowledge, drawing from Persian Hermetic of the Sassanid period. By the first decades of the 9th century, another group of works presenting Hermes and his teachings appeared. This time, they were attributed to Aristotle, and they were supposed to be his teachings to Alexander about talismans and other sorts of ritual magic. The titles of these works, labeled pseudo-Aristotelian Hermetica, are fabricated pseudo-Greek words, so fabricated to look like the known Aristotelian books. So as we have al-Suhrawardi, for instance, εισαγωγή, we have al-Istamachis, al-Istamatis, al-Stuvatas, al-Maditis, al-Haditus. Based on these treatises, which mainly contain information on astral magic, talismanic, and the concept of a personal perfect nature, an anonymous author disguised as Apollonius of Tyana, the famous sage of the Hellenistic period, wrote the Book of the Secret of Creation and of the Art of Nature, Kitab Sir al-Khalika Vasanat al-Tabi'a, containing the first version of the Emerald Tablet. The book was translated into Latin in the mid-12th century by Hugo of Sant'Aia. Subsequent shorter versions of the Emerald Tablet, were to be found in later texts, such as the Kitab Ustukus Alus al-Thani, which means the second book of the element of the foundation, composed in the late 9th or early 10th century, and attributed to Jabir ibn Hayyan, who is the famous alchemist of Arabic alchemy, who also has his own corpus, the Jabirian corpus, which is a compilation not written exclusively by him. Or in the equally famous Sir al-Asrar, or the Secret of Secrets. This was attributed to Aristotle, and it was supposed to be his teachings to Alexander, and as we know, had a superb career in medieval European literature as Secretum Secretorum. In the same vein, treatises on divination, omens, but also snake venoms and their antidotes, or the famous Hermetic Greek text Tyranides, a compilation of magico-medical works composed in the 4th century Common Era. So these translations, Kitab Giranis, were translated mostly through their Syriac translations or adaptations. So, with the exception perhaps of the Emerald Tablet, it was mainly the technical Hermetica, rather than the religio-philosophical ones, that formed the Arabic corpus Hermeticum. Only in the 11th century do we see philosophical gnomologia, or collections of maxims, attributed to Hermes. Although these are mostly ethical advice, translated from Greek, Sassanid Persian, or Sanskrit sources, rather than the monist interpretation of the universe so popular with the European Neoplatonist occultists of the Renaissance. So far, we saw the first aspect of the Hermetic tradition, the texts attributed to Hermes, as translated from Greek and other sources into Arabic. Let us skip for the moment the second aspect, that is the ideas and the worldview contained in this corpus, and turn our attention to the third, the attribution itself, the tradition of the figure of Hermes and on his wisdom. Now, Hermes' identity, unquestioned but vague and obscure in the ancient tradition, began to be scrutinized by the Arabs in two ways. Firstly, the confluence of various traditions associating him with multiple environments led to a theory of multiple Hermeses. Already in the Antiquity, the coexistence of the ancient Greek god, Hermes, and of the Egyptian Thoth, or Theth, had led to such theories. Thus, Cicero, for instance, enumerates several deities under this name, among which a son of the Nile, and an Akkadian deity who fled to Egypt, giving the Egyptians their laws and alphabet. Now, in the 9th century, the astrologer Abu Ma'shar al-Balkhi described in his Al-Uluf, which means the thousands, kind of universal history, chronicle, describes three different figures going with the name Hermes. These are an antediluvian prophet who built the pyramids and inscribed all his knowledge in hieroglyphics, because he had foreseen the flood. So, a Babylonian sage, secondly, who recovered this knowledge after the deluge. And the third, an Egyptian sage who was a master of talismanic science and taught Apollonius of Tyana. It seems that Abu Mashar drew on now lost Christian chronography for the first two Hermeses, and on an account by Al-Kindi, who was perhaps in possession of one of the dialogues from the Greek corpus Hermeticum, for the third one. The ultimate origins for the legend of the first Hermes are ancient. So, for instance, in Plato's Timaeus, as you know better than me, ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs survive catastrophes, and in Plato's Philebus, Thoth is the discoverer of mathematics, astronomy, and writing. Now, Abu Mashar's account was immensely influential in Islamic Hermetism, as it synthesized various ancient traditions and tried to put them in a meaningful historic context, possibly enhanced by the Greek epithet of Trismegistus, which was translated in Arabic as Musallath, threefold. Usually this was explained as threefold in wisdom or in grace, Musallath fil hikmet or fil nimet, as in the Greek tradition. Moreover, the first Hermes had allegedly invented writing, clothing, and was the first to build temples. The way he had obtained this knowledge was revelation, but we will revert to this soon. So, to recapitulate, the Islamic tradition ended considering the first Hermes, a sage who founded the sciences and preserved them in the pyramids before the flood. The second, the teacher of Pythagoras in Babylon, who renewed the sciences after the flood. And the third, a physician and alchemist in Egypt, teacher of Apollonius and of Asclepius. Secondly, by the first half of the 9th century, various efforts of Islamicizing the figure of Hermes had begun to exert their influence. Now, already in the 9th century, already in the 8th century, the prophet Idris, a rather obscure personality mentioned in the Quran, had been identified with the biblical Enoch, Achnuch in Arabic. Why Enoch? Well, because of the apocryphal books of Enoch, in which the prophet is shown as having ascended to heaven, where he received various revelations. Similarly, the Quranic Idris was raised to a high place by God, and this is almost all we know in the Quran for this personality. It has been proposed that the name comes from Ezra, through the Greek form Esdras, or Andreas, the cook of Alexander, who achieved immortality by accident. But it could also come, as Irene has suggested to me, from Pimandris, a deity appearing in the Greek Hermetica. Okay, we don't know. Idris afterwards was his name was explained post facto in an etymology from an Arabic root meaning teaching. Now, with the identification of Idris with Hermes, suggested by Al-Jahiz as early as in the 840s, and by the way, Hermes and Enoch were already associated as antediluvian sages in chronicles of the late antiquity, such as Panodorus or Anianus. So, with the identification of Idris with Hermes, the Hermetica gained the heavenly aura of revealed knowledge, indeed of prophecy. From then on, either traditions on Hermes were attributed to Idris, or it was taken as common knowledge that Hermes was called Idris by the Arabs and Enoch by the Jews. Furthermore, the Idris-Enoch-Hermes tradition added yet another component of Islamic origin. Already in an oral transmission from the early days of Islam recorded by Abu Mashar, Idris was said to have received 30 scrolls sent down by God. This is probably an account originating in Jewish traditions. Since Enoch, in these apocryphal Jewish texts, was taken up to heaven and obtained visions of the cosmos, his identification with Idris led to stories about the latter being ascended up to the fourth heaven, a story told in a number of versions by Al-Maqdisi in 966. After some debates, whose only traces have survived, And through the obscure reference to an ascent to heaven in the context of divine revelation in the Emerald Tablet, the first Hermes, or Idris, was taken as having risen to the sphere of Saturn, which is the seventh and outermost planetary sphere, where he stayed for 30 years until he witnessed all the states of the heavens. This is the tradition as we read it in the famous epistles of the Brethren of Purity, or Ikhwan al-Safar, an encyclopedic compendium of Ismaili allegiances composed in the 10th century Common Era. So by the Ottoman times, which are my speciality, but with which I will not deal here extensively, all these traditions had been crystallized. This is how the mid-16th century encyclopedist Tashke Pruzadeh relates the story about of Idris, identifying him with Enoch and Hermes. Know that the source of the philosophical and speculative sciences, the master of all there is in them, is the prophet Idris, peace be upon him. God gave him prophecy and wisdom and knowledge of the stars. God sent a book of 30 leaves down upon him, and he made him understand the number of years and arithmetic. And God taught him all the languages, even though the people of his time spoke 72 languages. He was born in Egypt, and they called him Hermes of the Hermeses, Hermes al-Harran, and in Greek, Hermes, that is to say, Mercury, Utarid, which is the name of the planet. It was Arabicized into Hermes, but his original name was Enoch, Anuch, which was Arabicized into Achnuch. God Almighty called him Idris in his clear Arabic book, which is the Quran, because of how much he had studied God's book. This I lose the etymology of Idris by the three-letter Arabic root of teaching. It is said that his teacher was Garthadimun or Akthadimun, the Egyptian. This is the Stoic and the Gnostic Agathodemon. The meaning of this is the auspicious one, the good fortune, al-Sa'id al-Jad. It is said that he is also Seth, peace be upon him. Idris' time on earth lasted for 82 years. Then God lifted him up to the high place. He is the first one who sewed clothes and judged by the stars, the first one to give warning against floods, the first one to build temples and praise God in them, the first one who looked into medicine, and the first one who composed poems and verses of poetry. He is the one who built the pyramids of Egypt and illustrated in them, through paintings, all the sciences and arts and their tools, fearing that the records might be taken by the flood. Now, his mid-17th century continuator, Khatib Chelebi's narrative is even more elaborate. Idris, calling himself Hermes al-Hiramise and al-Musalaf bil-Nima, the thrice blessed, a version of Greek Trismegistus, foretold the flood and kept all secrets of knowledge in the pyramids he built. I quote again. Idris wrote with a pen and came to be known for the sciences in a way that no one else came to be known. He was called Hermes of the Hermeses, Hermes al-Haramisa, and the one thrice blessed, al-Musallaf bil-Nima, because he was a prophet, a king, and a philosopher. All of the sciences which appeared before the flood came from him, according to many scholars. He was the first Hermes, Hermes al-Awwal. That is, Idris bin son of Yared, son of Machlail, son of Anush, son of Shith, son of Adam, peace be upon him, the resident in the uppermost part of Upper Egypt. End of quote. Like Tashke Pruzadeh, Khatib Chelebi attributes to Idris or Hermes the first knowledge of the stars, the building of temples, the invention of medicine. He foresaw the flood and built the pyramids in fear that all these signs would be lost. I quote again. He built the pyramids in the uppermost part of Upper Egypt and made images of all the arts and tools in them and sketched the descriptions of the sciences and perfections in the desire to preserve them for eternity. Now, what may be considered striking in the light of the pre-Ottoman Hermetic tradition is that no Ottoman source seems to mention the three Hermeses. Instead, they stick to the first and to his identification with Enoch and Idris. Furthermore, to my knowledge, there is no significant Hermetic literature in Ottoman Turkish. No sayings, maxims, or treatises attributed to Hermes. A scholar of the late 16th century, Mustafa Ali from Gallipoli, as well as a Sufi from the early 18th, Boursevi, mentioned some maxims which are known as belonging to this literature, but they both attribute them to Idris rather than Hermes. This shows that part of this literature was circulating, but not under the form of a corpus Hermeticum. Why is that? Well, I have an answer, but I will have to make yet another digression first. So let us go back to the three aspects of Hermetism. The first, the corpus Hermeticum, the texts, was indeed translated from Greek but also from Middle Persian to Arabic and hence to Latin, whereas other similar texts, especially describing magic rituals and talismans, were added. And the second aspect, accounts of Hermes himself, was developed by incorporating Jewish and perhaps pre-Islamic Arabic lore into the notion of the three personalities, the first of which, a prophet identified with Idris, was raised to heavens by God, learned all knowledge by revelation, and then kept his knowledge in the pyramids to save it from the flood he had foreseen. But what about the third aspect, the ideas we came to designate as Hermetic? The works mentioned so far and attributed to Hermes are mostly either magical treatises or collections of moral maxims. So they are what are called the technical Hermetica. And by the way, I'm sure you will be wondering by now, where is the Neoplatonism? What do these stories have to do in a series of lectures on the fates of Platonism in the late antiquity? Now, for one, the very content of the magical Hermetic treatises, or the technical Hermetica, points mostly to a Hermetic worldview. Let me remind you shortly the distinction between natural magic or astral or, yes, Hermetic, which is based on the axiom as above, so below, and seeks to manipulate the cosmic hierarchies, on the one hand, and on the other hand, demonic or ritual or Solomonic magic, which seeks to invoke various kinds of supernatural entities, demons, through rituals and magic alphabets. Although the boundaries between these two categories are blurred at the best, most of the techniques enumerated and analyzed in the magical texts contained in the Arabic Hermetica clearly belong to the first kind. The very reputation of Hermes as the founder of astrology attests to this. The Aristotelian doctrine of the supralunary and the sublunary worlds, but also the general Weltanschauung of the medieval and early modern Eurasian cultures, made belief in the influence of celestial movements upon terrestrial life almost inevitable and self-evident. Even if there might be objections against astrology, no one seriously doubted the Hermetic motto, above and below, which dictated that the movement of the celestial bodies had something to do with what happened on Earth and with the lives of people. Yet, there was a development that united Hermetism with Neoplatonism, and this happened in the 12th and 13th centuries. Now, contrary to astrologers or encyclopedists, Muslim philosophers, the Falasifa, had been systematically ignoring Hermes and his works through the Middle Ages, preferring to focus on Aristotle proper. What happened in the late 12th century was the formation by Sheikh al-Din al-Suhrawardi, who died in 1191, the formation of the so-called Illuminationist philosophy, as we translate the term Ishraqi, refined by Shams ad-Din al-Shahazuri in the late 13th century. Al-Suhrawardi's natural philosophy gave a primordial importance to light, varying intensities of which produce the array of phenomena from immaterial entities down to material bodies. Al-Suhrawardi claimed that reality, from material entities to material bodies, was produced by the emanation of light in various intensities, and that conversely, knowledge of the world manifests through light as it is perceived by varying degrees of human vision. I suppose I don't have to stress the Neoplatonic strand of this theory to you. Furthermore, this world vision was supplemented by a theory of disparate worlds or spheres of existence, which postulated that beside the corporeal world of physical entities, the Alem il-Mulk, there is a spiritual world, Alem il-Jaberut, a world of images, Alem Mithal, where one finds oneself while dreaming, and an incorporeal world, Alem il-Melekut, the world of God and of angels, where one goes after death. This chain of worlds, or rather spheres of existence, had Quranic roots and was developed by the medieval philosophers, but also by Al-Ghazali and Ibn Arabi, under Neoplatonic, Gnostic, and mystical influences. The details of this, the interdependencies and the hierarchies of this chain were not unanimously established. Early Sufis postulated that there was above the visible world or mulk, the world of divine command, Alamu Malakut, or Gaib, the unseen, where spirits and spiritual entities resided. This world was in turn governed by Jabarut, the world of divine names and attributes, and above it, only the pure divine essence, or Lahut. However, in Al-Ghazali's philosophy, the Jabarut was an intermediate world or barrier, the Barzakh, between the two worlds of exoteric and esoteric meaning, Mulk and Malakut respectively, from which it borrowed elements. A similar model is found in Ibn Arabi. Jabarut or Barzakh is the world of imagination, between the world of visible forms, Mulk or Shahada, and that of meanings and of the unseen, Malakut. Now, the innovation brought about by al-Suhrawardi and his followers was exactly the addition of the world of images. Actually, as shown recently by Cornelis van Lith in this very erudite book, al-Suhrawardi did not describe this world in detail, or in fact, did not speak of it at all. Al-Suhrawardi had written about suspended images, Mithal Mu'alak, a kind of Platonic archetypes whence dreams, imagination, but also jinn, demons, and miracles originate. Mu'alak, so suspended in the meaning that they are not existing in a place or a locus. So they are ubiquitous somehow. Suhrawardi had located them in the 8th klim, I quote, the 8th klim in which are Jabalk, Jabars, and Hurkalia. Let us note here that Jabalk and Jabars, or Jabilka and Jabirsa, were two mythical cities situated in earlier cosmographies and Quranic commentaries in the two edges of Earth where the sun rose and set. This is a very interesting story that goes back to the Syriac versions of the romance of the Alexandrian romance, and which might draw from some references in Plinius. The obscure Hurkalia might be a corruption of Greek Heraclea, but little can we say about it for the moment. Actually, we know next to nothing about Hurkalia. It was al-Shakazuri, 1 century later, who elaborated the idea of these images as constituting a separate world or sphere of existence, at times using the same pseudo-Ptolemaic notion of an 8th climb beyond the 7 earthly climbs. So I quote, as the earth is divided into 7 climbs, so there is an 8th, the world of suspended images, which holds the bodies ascended to heaven. Wonders and marvels that become visible to prophets and saints are mostly due to reaching that world. In Qutb-al-Din Shirazi's commentary in the early 14th century, it is explained that the 8th climb is the world of images, Alam Mithal. Of the 8 climbs, 7 are the geographical ones, quote, with dimensions and extent which are perceptible to the senses, end of quote, whereas the twin cities, Jabils and Jabirka, are, I quote, cities of the world of the elements in the universe of the archetypal form. And Hyrcalia belongs to the world of the celestial spheres of the universe of archetypal forms. And so on and so forth. Such descriptions passed on through commentators of such as Al-Taftazani in the late 14th century and others, especially in the Indo-Iranian world. And sometimes they were subject to further differentiations. For instance, Shamsuddin Muhammad Lahiji in the mid-15th century identifies Jabilka with the world of images in the East turned toward the spiritual entities. I quote, "It is the interworld between the suprasensory world and the world visible to the senses. It contains all the archetypes of the universe, and thus of necessity is an immense city. Jabir Sa, to the west, is the world of the image, the interworld in which the spirits dwell when they have left the world of earthly existence. That is the very place where the forms of all completed works exist, the forms of all moral behavior and good and bad actions. The structure of Jabilka is more subtle and more pure." End of quote. Thus, the world of images, added to the canon, to the Illuminationist canon by al-Shahrazuri and established throughout the medieval reception of Illuminationism, was a sphere of existence containing archetypes of all things and from which both miracles and mystic visions come. The world of archetypes of the Neoplatonists, the mundus imaginalis, according to Henri Corbin's formulation. In the works of al-Suhrawardi or Ibn Arabi, the world of images is even the origin of miracles, as pure souls can create figures there that, in turn, manifest in the physical world. This is, for instance, how Sufis could appear in different places simultaneously. Otherwise, Illuminationist cosmology follows the earlier order of the worlds, with Malakut, the world of pure souls, either angels, who govern the material species, or soul lights, who animate material bodies, the souls of the celestial spheres, the human souls. So, with this world of souls being below Jabarut, of the world of pure intellects, and above Mulk, in the hierarchy of emanations of the light of lights, which is God. So you see, from the light of lights, the Nur al-Anwar, comes the world of intellects and of pure souls, and then the world of sublunar existence, with the world of images being somehow a parallel world of archetypes, so to speak. So for Illuminationism and Neoplatonism. But what about Hermetism? Well, al-Suhrawardi, for one thing, was the first Arabic philosopher who explicitly made Hermes his forerunner, the first in a chain of sages that ends in his revelations. As Van Blader again remarks, this may have been a tool in order to criticize the philosophers, the peripatetics, following Ibn Sina, following Avicenna, by claiming a quote, more ancient, authoritative, and divine source than Aristotle, end of quote. Now, instead of promoting a kind of continuous revelation or inspiration, which could be achieved by anybody following some ascetic rules or exercising love of God, as certain strands of Sufism did, Illuminationism, again in al-Shahrazuri's formulation, invented a genealogy of knowledge, or rather wisdom, hikmah, that went back to a primordial revelation before Muhammad, before the Prophet. Thus, for most Illuminationists, all esoteric and in a degree exoteric knowledge was known to the ancient sages, usually beginning with the Prophet Idris, identified or not with Hermes Trismegistus, and including Greek philosophers such as Pythagoras and Plato. Both points, the emphasis on inspiration and the Hermetic aspect, favored an elitist gnoseology where knowledge should be kept secret from the eyes of the many. In this, Illuminationism differed drastically from both ulema theology and Sufi theory. Whereas he does not show any familiarity with the actual texts of the corpus Hermeticum, al-Suhrawardi insists on a twofold chain of transmission, beginning with Hermes and unfolding in two parts, the Western and the Eastern. The Western part contains Empedocles, Pythagoras, and Plato in the ancient world, and some Muslim philosophers in the Islamic period. The eastern one passes through some mythical sages and kings of ancient Persia. Gayumath, Faridun, Kai Khusrav. Both lines and to Suhrawardi's own philosophy. This tendency was so strong that the immensely influential illuminationist al-Khazuri's account of the three Hermeses faded away, as it seems, in favor of the forceful image of Hermes receiving perennial wisdom. Thus, both the Hermes mythology and the prestige of ancient Greeks obtained a new boost with the illuminationist philosophy. Plato came to be described as the dean of ancient illuminationists, whereas Aristotle was the dean of the ancient peripatetics, or Phalasifa, the philosophers. The juxtaposition of these two schools was made already by al-Suhrawardi and his immediate followers, but not in an ancient context. So, in his work, the Mashaun, the peripatetics, were the philosophers, the Phalasifa, like Avicenna, trying to approach truth via logic rather than revelation or illumination. So, initially a term designating all ancient philosophers, Aristotelians and Platonists alike, for Ibn Sina, for Avicenna, it meant more strictly Aristotle and his followers. It was Averroes and later al-Suhrawardi used the term peripatetic as a synonym for Ibn Sina and his doctrines. For al-Suhrawardi, his own illuminationist philosophy was the mystical opposite to the rationalist peripatetics. Although he conceived, among others, Pythagoras and Plato as his precursors in the transmission of Hermes' wisdom, al-Suhrawardi did not identify the Platonic school as illuminationists or Ishraqiyun. This identification is perhaps first met in the work of al-Jurjani of the early 15th century, where we read that the dean of illuminationist sages, that is, those masters of asceticism and regimen who do not conform to the legal rulings in their abstinence, in which case they would be Sufis. So their dean is Plato, whereas Aristotle is the dean of the peripatetic ones, the Al-Mashaun, who are those masters of contemplation and demonstration who do not adhere to a confession among faiths of the prophets, in which case they would be theologians. Furthermore, now I am ready to try to give an answer to the question I am sure tantalizes you, or not so much, about the Ottomans. How come they ignore the three Hermeses legend? Because we saw already that the illuminationist version of Hermeticism, stressing the celestial course of Hermes' perennial wisdom, made the next two Hermeses fade away. Because al-Suhrawardi's philosophy became so deeply influential in the Ottoman world, one may postulate that those authors, speaking of Hermes, have links with the illuminationist tradition. Indeed, authors associated to other intellectual traditions, especially Akbarian Sufism, relate the Idris stories of elevation and inspiration, identifying him with Enoch, but not with Hermes. Furthermore, this emphasis went together with a Hermetic theory on knowledge, namely esotericism, or the belief that knowledge must be kept from the few and away from the common folk. So, with Suhrawardi's illuminationism, our circle closes. Islamic Neoplatonism and Hermetism converge, a couple of centuries before they do the same in Renaissance Italy as well. And with this remark, that somehow justifies the inclusion of my exhausting talk to this splendid series of lectures, I feel I have to end here. This was a story of cultural translation, a story of transfer, but also of creative creation of one of the most influential intellectual products of the world of late antiquity. It would have a second or rather third life in the West, as we saw, throughout the Renaissance and beyond, in which humanists reclaimed the text of the corpus Hermeticum and perhaps took from the Arabs the emphasis on Hermes' perennial wisdom. As for the Hermetic ideas, they also had a glamorous career, although one that soon was restrained in the occultist circles of the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. So I hope I did not, you are still alive after this 1 hour of talk, and I hope I will be able to answer your any questions.
Marinos, thank you very much for this great, illuminating and nicely illustrated talk.
Let me just warn you about the questions that I'm not very much, I mean, I'm not a historian of philosophy. So I also am a bit of at a loss between, especially with al-Suhrawardi and his world of image. I find him extremely difficult to read and understand. So perhaps I suppose that you as most of you as Neoplatonists, experts on Neoplatonism, may be much more acquainted with this kind of vocabulary and way of thinking that I am. So I'm not sure I will be able to answer adequately to any answer on this, but I'll try.
Well, don't worry. We don't have your knowledge either. So your knowledge either. So please, I think there is plenty of time for discussion, for questions or remarks. Yes, Marie.
Yeah, thank you very much for this fascinating talk. It was really interesting. I really enjoyed it. So my question is rather focused on the religious groups that practice all of that. I remember reading in Faudens, the Egyptian Hermes, that the philosophical Hermetica could be also, I mean, his hypothesis was that they were part of initiatory logoi, as part of initiatory speeches that were given to a certain sect of mysteries that had a certain sequence, but now it's lost. So my question is, what you presented, for instance, the Jabirian corpus, was this, all these writers, do they belong to a certain particular school of thought, as it were? Are they Sunnis? Are they Ismailites? Do we find the Hermetic influence all over the place in the Islamic world, or is it focused in certain religious groups that could be considered as a continuation of those, initiatory late antique groups?
Okay, thank you for this question. No, Islamic Hermetism in general, I mean, this, especially in the medieval era, seems to come across all these denominations. So, for instance, we have all these largely Sunni authors like Jabir or I don't know, Ibn Bashar in the medieval era, and then the 11th or 12th century we have Ismaili, that is Shi texts like the Ikhwan Safa, the Brethren of Purity, who are building upon these ideas and these traditions. So if the cult of Hermes, a certain, no, not a cult, but a certain emphasis on Hermes was attributed to the Harranians, the Sabians of Harran, this was first, this was not, it's not at all certain that it was a reality, because it was probably created ex post facto. We don't know almost anything about the original religion of Harran. Secondly, this was outside the Islamic context. So the purported relation of the Sabians of Harran to Islamic Hermeticism is that they as adorers of Hermes, if they were so, played a pivotal role in translating the Greek Hermetica or Syriac Hermetica into Arabic. This is not certain at all. So most probably, okay, Van Bladel shows this convincingly enough that these were passed through this large substratum of Hermetic texts that were circulating outside these closed societies of adepts. So, and eventually the existence of antediluvian prophet Hermes, who was Idris, who was a prophet in the Quran and so on, and all these ideas became ubiquitous. So they were common knowledge. the texts circulated under Hermes' name are mostly texts of magic or divination. So again, this was common knowledge. It had not a specific circle of initiates or something, and a specific audience, so to speak. And okay, there was this kind of cultural appropriation by al-Suhrawardi, with taking Hermes as his precursor, as the prophet in the beginning of the chain of transmission that ends to his own philosophy. But then again, I mean, Suhrawardi was popular among Sunnis and Sufis alike. He was never considered a heretic, although this theory of emanations could sound heretic enough. He was very, very popular in the Ottomans, in the Ottoman elite, and also immensely popular in the Indian subcontinent, in the Mughal lands, and in the various Iranian dynasties, under Iranian dynasties. So, no, I think these are mostly talking about the intellectual traditions, perhaps, but not of specific denominations.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that about it covers. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I can see there is a question, written one in the chat. Donato, is Donato Marco Donato? I don't know, but I can read the question. Suhrawardi was a Neoplatonist Hermetist in the East. Can you tell us something about the 13th century Neoplatonist Ibn Sabn in the West, Andalusia?
Okay, here I will disappoint you. At least I warned you. No, I have nothing to say about Ibn Sabin, because, okay, my interest in al-Suhrawardi came from studying Ottoman philosophy and Ottoman esotericism, whatever. So, no, okay, I cannot tell something I don't really know. So I apologize. I said I'm not an Arabist.
Don't worry, Marinos. I admit I have never heard about that philosopher, but perhaps someone here
I've heard of
knows.
him, but I'm not really into him. I don't.
Okay, Padeli?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for this very lucid talk. I would like to ask about the presence of Zoroaster in this tradition, because I mean, what you presented, which is really interesting. I mean, this kind of division between what in this tradition, I mean, the people who are the people of illumination, and then the peripatetics, and Plato would be such a figure, I mean, belonging to the first group. And we can see this kind of distinction, division, also in the Greek tradition. For, I mean, this idea that Aristotle and then peripatetic philosophers represent some kind of deviation from an ancient wisdom. We can see this in Plotinus, for instance. And the thing is that, well, philosophers who were older than Aristotle were extremely important because they were all Pythagoreans. So Plato was a Pythagorean for the Neoplatonists. We call them Neoplatonists, but they believed that he was a Pythagorean philosopher, and he believed that Empedocles, whom you quoted, was a Pythagorean too, and Parmenides. And the most important philosophers were Pythagoreans, which means that in some sense they were disciples of Pythagoras. And Pythagoras was extremely important, either, and this is one branch of the tradition, because he was a disciple of Orpheus, or because he was instructed by the Magi, the Zoroastrian, the disciples of Zoroaster. And this is something that we read in Plutarch, and this is something that is later revived in the philosophy of Pletho, Iorios Gemistos, in the 15th century. I mean, this idea that there is an ancient wisdom which is extremely important and which goes back to Zoroaster. And this is, I think, something that we also see in Renaissance philosophy. So Ficino had this idea, Pico della Mirandola, whom you quoted as well. They thought of Zoroaster as being extremely important, and Zoroaster is represented also in the famous fresco by Raphael in the Palazzo Vaticano. So I mean, whereas the things this was extremely helpful and extremely lucid. It seemed to me that what Greek authors would see as the founder of this tradition, who was somehow Zoroaster, in the Arabic tradition, or the tradition, the Arabic and the rest of in the Persian world, etc., Hermes seems to play this role. Is this correct, or am I missing something?
Yes, I think it may be correct. Yes, Zoroaster is not, as far as I know or remember, mentioned in the Arabic Hermetic tradition. Of course, it was influenced also. It had, I mean, part of the Arabic Hermetica are translations of Zoroastric texts, okay, in Pahlavi. And we know this especially for this part of Hermetica that consists of collections of moral maxims.
But he's not quoted as the initiator of this tradition, of this. No, okay.
No. These maxims are attributed to Hermes. So we can trace them back to Pahlavi sources, or as we can trace other ones to Hindu, to Sanskrit sources, and so on. They have all been amalgamated into this Hermetic tradition. And okay, Hermes, I mean, from an Islamic point of view, it was I think the identification of Idris with Enoch who made this, which brought this notion of primordial and perennial wisdom going before the prophet. So as soon as because Idris was just a name, so as soon as he was associated with Enoch, because they had both in a mysterious way ascended into heaven, then there was automatically the notion of receiving wisdom from heaven somehow. So they all were, Idris was antediluvian in this tradition, so it was the next step was to identify him with Hermes. So to have but in most sources they are just prophets, you know.
Yes.
I think it's not before al-Suhrawardi that we have this sense of wisdom.
Yes.
And this is the very word wisdom as philosophy. They don't say felsefer anymore, they say hikmah, which is wisdom, comes from this tradition. And then we see, for instance, in Ottoman sources, supplanting the word for philosophy throughout the centuries. So this idea of a wisdom that encompasses everything goes to Suhrawardi and his followers. So this, which also elevates Hermes as a figure almost in a, I mean, okay, because before that he was, okay, a prophet, like Idris, like Adam, like Abraham, Ibrahim, like so on and so forth. A prophet that, by the way, had invented writing, had invented the temples, had invented astrology, whatever. But this was
I
just-
see. Yes, thank you. But the idea that Hermes is the initiator of this illuminationist tradition goes back to Suhrawardi.
Yes,
So he is the one who conceives of this.
exactly. Previous accounts just stress that, okay, he received knowledge and wrote it in the pyramids to be preserved. So the second Hermes recovers it from there.
Okay.
And that's all. I mean, it's right, knowledge like such as astrology and also temples, sewing, clothes, writing, things like that. According to the texts attributed to Hermes, these are technical Hermetica, so we can induce that he was also considered the creator of magic. But then again, all this had not the status of a higher wisdom, which would initiate a chain of followers.
Great.
They were
Thank you.
techniques more than wisdom, you see.
Thanks.
Thank you. I can see that there are a couple of questions, written ones again. So I can happily read them. So, do you believe that Hermetic belief was a part of daily widespread cultural knowledge? This is the first one. And
Yes, I would say for some people, yes. For educated people more, perhaps. I don't really know, and perhaps we don't really know if, I mean, I could suppose that the lower strata, the illiterate ones, for instance, would rely more on Idris as a name than Hermes. But yes, it was a very widespread belief on this personality. Because okay, Hermetic belief is, as I said, it can refer to the traditions on the person of Hermes, okay, or to these ideas, the ideas of that as below, so above, so of this correspondence. This was more or less common knowledge, but I mean that everybody believed that the astral world was influencing the terrestrial one, but the degree of elaboration, of course, varied enormously.
thank you. So there are 3 more questions now. So second one, given your interest in Ottoman philosophy led you to this, I'm curious as to how much you see polytheistic thought from the origins of the polytheistic monism of Greco-Egyptian Hermeticism being excised from or maybe still sneaking into this Arabic Islamic world of Hermeticism.
Look, because the question starts with Ottomans, no, in Ottoman times there is I mean, polytheistic thought is next to nothing anymore. There is a thing that is connected not strictly to Hermeticism, but to occult philosophy, or rather occult science, more or less, like occult medicine or magic. There are, okay, if you say that the planets influence the sublunary world, most of the authors do stress that these are not the planets themselves. It's God through the planets. So they were very careful to exclude any possibility that the planets are kind of deities. Okay? And medieval Arabic magic, like we see in a famous text, Gharat al-Hakim, which came to be known in Latin as Picatrix. Perhaps you know it as Picatrix. It became very famous in the medieval Europe. So Picatrix is a work of strictly natural magic. So there are the correspondences and the homologies of planets with metals and with herbs and so on. it seems, and this is a recent discovery somehow, there are works by Liana Saif, for instance, that there was a kind of a shift toward the supernatural in the 13th and 14th centuries and on, where things are much more explicable, so to speak, and where also the planets themselves are described as, there is this word ruhaniyat, which means spirituality somehow. So this spirituality is in many authors in this period taken to be something autonomous, something near a deity. It's not deity, of course, because they're still Muslims, but it becomes as the question, okay, polytheistic monism. Somehow it comes near. Okay, and this is a feature of late medieval Islamicate science or philosophy.
Thank you. And another question, I would like to know if Prophet Hermes is really Idris in the Quran, and is there any Greek prophet in quotation marks other than Hermes?
The second question is negative, no, as far as I can remember now. No, we don't know. Okay, Quran mentions Idris, and that's all. It only says that there is Idris and God raised him to a high place. The identification with Hermes, actually with Enoch, and through this with Hermes, comes in the 9th century through Abu Mashar. So, strictly speaking, no, Hermes is not really Idris in the Quran. Again, this is a matter of explanation, of commentary, okay? So, according to Abu Mashar, according to 9th and 10th and 11th century authors, yes, he is the same. But the Quranic text does not mention Hermes at all. So Hermes is connected with Idris only in the 9th century on.
Thank you, Marino. And then one more question. The eighth line, as mentioned earlier, was also connected to the fixed stars in Ptolemaic cosmology. So would you say the world of images is at the level of the fixed stars themselves?
No, that climb is really beyond this world. I mean, that's how al-Suhrawardi and Shahrazuri describe it. So, see, for instance, how Van Lith talks about the suspended images. He says that al-Suhrawardi one time calls the suspended images the eighth climb, which is especially evocative of the similarity with bodies. It is, however, not correct to see the suspended images as an independent world in which we can go in and out. Of souls and intellects, we do not ask where they are, because they are immaterial and hence have an equal relationship to any place in this earthly world. Suspended images are similarly immaterial. So these four realms of intellect, soul, body, and suspended image are not like fluids of different densities sitting in layers on top of each other, but are like an emulsion in which all the different parts are equally mixed throughout the entire volume without dissolving. And then about Shahrazuri, he says that the notion of suspended images tends to the world existing parallel to our earthly world as an eighth climb next to the standard division of the world into 7 climes. This populated world that mimics the earthly world from its stars and celestial bodies down to its plants and rocks, and so on. But we'll have to to accept that illuminationist philosophers imagine this climb as something besides this world. So it doesn't have the seven climes are describe the earth, but they belong in the same sphere of existence with the various the heavens, the fixed stars, and the seven heavens, and so on. The world of images is something that exists in parallel, that cannot be situated. It has no place in the material world.
Thank you very much. If there is no other question for the moment, I have two questions, or a question and a comment, if I may, Marino. The first one is again about Idris. We have discussed about the possible origins of his name. It may be also a combined origin. And I remember that when we first discussed the topic, you found that there is also an English scholar who a century ago proposed that connection between Idris and Pimandris. So I was not the first one to have that idea. But I now have another idea. I wonder whether there could also be a relation with Theandritis or Theandritis, which is mentioned by Marinos in the life of the Neoplatonic philosopher Proclus as a god that was venerated by the Arabs. So his name is Theandritis or Theandrios, so God and man. And there is, we know about him from epigraphs, inscriptions in Syria, sometimes identified with Zeus. And there is also a Christian reception of Theandrios, because Pseudo-Dionysius refers to the theandriki energy of the Christ as an energy that is both divine and human. And later, John of Scythopolis, a bishop from Palestine, says, well, it is double energy, both divine and human. So we know that these Theandrios had a reception in later in Christianity. So I was wondering whether Idris it evokes a bit Theandrios or Theandritis. So that could be another possible connection, perhaps. That was the question remark. And now the question, I didn't know anything about al-Suhrawardi before you, but I am really impressed to see that the levels that you have shown correspond to the levels of Plotinus ontology. So there is the Nur al-Anwar, the light of lights. So this is the one. Exactly, Plotinus says that it is the big light, and all other levels are lights from light. And then there is the Jabarut and the Malakut, corresponding to intellect and soul. So you have placed the world of images at the level of the Jabarut.
No, I think I have, this is just a defect of the table function in Word. The idea is that this word is somehow beside this sort of emanations. Actually, yes, so you see, I mean, I suppose this should be just one big, I mean, it should not be divided into four, okay?
I'm not sure I can see it from here.
The world of images just besides this series of emanation.
So it is not that it is at the level of intellect.
Look, there is. This is one of the questions that I have. Okay. It's difficult for me to understand and to make sense of. So Shakazuri says that the world of image exists between the sensual and the intelligible world. He says that its lower strata touch the earthly world and its higher strata touch the material intelligible world.
So it seems to
this
be at
means
the
that
level,
it would be
at the level of soul,
at
as
the level of,
intermediary, like imagination.
yes, somehow. It is there's also a very complex rationale, a very complex idea of how do souls, I mean, this all began with Avicenna. It all began with the question of how to, of the afterlife. So there were levels of souls, and some of them had to foretaste in the interval between death and resurrection. Okay, they should somehow experience some of these categories of souls, according to the perfection, for instance, should experience either a foreshadowing of paradise or a foreshadowing of the torments of hell. So the problem was, in a philosophical way that you understand much better than I do, how does an immaterial thing, like a soul, since the body is gone, imagine a material thing such as the torments of hell? And to explain this, Avicenna first talked about these images somehow. He talked of celestial bodies where the faculty of imagination still exists or is mirrored somehow. And so there is this complex ideas which were further developed by Suhrawardi and then his commentators, and Shakazuri first and foremost. I'm not sure I can answer more specifically to this.
No, I think that I understand, in the sense that I suspect that suspended images are lower than the ideas. They are at the level of soul. There are something like notions or conceptions, and perhaps they have something to do with imagination, but I don't know, because I'm not.
Yes, it was imagination. But the problem, the philosophical problem, as far as I can understand, was that imagination is a faculty of the body. So you had to, in order to have it present outside the body, you had to postulate a world of imagination, of images, okay, that come suspended like, the idea is suspended like, okay, now I see a glass of water, it's suspended, its image is suspended before my eyes, and then it goes. That's the idea of suspended. They're not there everywhere, they're immaterial. So that's how they try to combine this, the faculty of imagination, the material body, and the probability of things imagined that is seen outside the body, even either after death or in some other situations, okay, of the intellect.
Yes, thank you. You
first,
are giving me reasons for studying more of these fascinating figures. Yes, sorry.
No, and for the first suggestion about Idris, well, I don't know. It seems, I mean, since he's this how was it? The Theandris.
Theandrios or
Yes.
Theandritis or
Uh,
Theandritis.
Okay, I mean, I was prepared to say that I find it, I mean, perhaps Esdras is more probable because a popular deity in the Arab desert would be more probable to come from a Jewish personality rather than a Hermetic figure, okay? But if Theandritis was supposed to be an Arab deity, then perhaps we could examine that it could work vice versa. It could be Theandritis, a corruption of Idris, of the deity called Idris.
I wouldn't say so, but I mean, I would tend to think that Idris would evoke various names. Pimandris is the first book of the Hermetica, so it fits very well. Theandritis, a god of the Arabs, it also fits very well. So perhaps the name corresponds to different origins at the same time. Perhaps, I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know if, I mean, we can only make suggestions.
Yes.
I have the impression that no, we can't find the name in any pre-Islamic inscriptions. There are some of them. So all you can do is making these suggestions and then examine if there are ways that this personality could make his way into the Quran. And then
Exactly.
things go smoothly.
We have two more comments.
Yes, Idris from Derasah. Idris from Derasah is from Derasah is this, I allude to this etymology, which according to most scholars is an ex post facto etymology. So they had, we have Idris as a name that of a mentioned in the Quran. So some scholars, some commentators explained his name with this trilateral root. But I think that most scholars, from a linguistic way, most of all, do not find it possible that Idris came from Derasah. They find it more possible that this was an explanation of later commentators to explain this name.
With respect to the Rasa, what is interesting?
Yes, this is what I was answering now. The Arabic, you know, is working with triliteral consonant roots. Okay, so the roots with dal, re, sa, sin, d, r, and s, so to speak, means this knowledge. So this can be can form verbs or nouns or any kind of a lot of words. So commentators of the Quran, some commentators of the Quran suggested that the name Idris comes from this root, the triliteral root. But most scholars deny it. I'm not a linguist either, so I cannot say for sure. I can just follow scholarship.
Yes, I mean, I'm not a linguist either, but just an interesting coincidence. I didn't know about the Rasa, but there is an etymology of Pimandris that connects the name with the knowledge of Ra in Coptic. So the idea of knowledge as well. So this is an interesting parallel. And then Kasra, who points out that Nur al-Anwar first appears in the Arabic translation of Plotinus' Enneads. So it is not al-Suhrawardi who coined the term. It is taken from the Enneads, light of light.
Okay, I guess that's great. This must be a comment sent to you because I can't see it.
Kasra, yes, that was to me.
This is very interesting.
But also,
But all these I mean, these etymologies are. I would refrain from making too much of them. because, for instance, okay, Egyptian is also a Semitic language, but knowledge of Ra has nothing to do with the triliteral root. It's just a coincidence. Okay, because Ra is the name of a god. But in the root of Terasa, Ra is just one of the three consonants. So it's completely different. Okay, so there's a question about, see now, what does Hermes mean in Greek? Nothing that we know. Huh?
Well, in the Cratylus, Plato connects the name of Hermes with laying, saying something. But yes, that's why we talk about hermeneutics nowadays. It is the interpreter.
Yes, but as most of Cratylus etymologies, this also sounds a bit.
Yes, it is not
post facto, at least.
linguistics, but just. Padeli, do you have something to say on that?
I think perhaps it is not even Indo-European, so we can't really know what the word means. At least, I mean, some scholars believe that the word or the name does not go back to Indo-European tradition.
No, the Cratylus gives an etymology that serves the function of Plato's own philosophy. Does not really give us anything concrete about the real etymology. But there is one more question on etymologies to everyone. What about Jackson's argument about the origin of Pimandris as a corruption of Amenemhat-Il's third throne name? Okay, I don't know anything about that, but Marino?
I don't know either. I mean, if this three is the sound of a Semitic sound like ein, so this is one word, it sounds legit, as they say. I don't know. I mean, you are much more acquainted with this period than I am. I would think that it's more probable that these names in the Hermetica, the Greek Hermetica, come from corruptions of Egyptian words, perhaps with a post-facto etymology, the Cratylus-like etymology, like, okay, this Egyptian word which you cannot pronounce being corrupted as Pimandris to make it, to give it a sense in Greek. But it seems, to me, it seems probable that all these names come from Egyptian, as the whole Hermetic tradition. And also because the Greek names like Pimandris or Theandris are sort of, don't you agree? They sound too fabricated. They're like, literature, like novels, like somebody would imagine a name meaning something. It's much, to me, it sounds more probable, but I'm not a historian of late antiquity, nor of Egyptian law, whatever. To me, it sounds more probable that these names are Greek corruptions of Egyptian names and vice versa. And now, if there are corruptions of the Egyptian names, then why not? Why couldn't Idris be a corruption of this Egyptian name as well? I don't know.
Thank you, Marino. Kasra, hi.
Hi, thanks a lot, Marinos. Speaking of etymologies, I had one point that could be of interest or maybe not. The term Hurgalya that you mentioned, some people try to explain it with a Greek etymology, Hercules or something to that effect. But in Persian scholarship, it's more or less agreed that it most likely is not Hurgalya, but Huargalya, and Huar being the Old Persian word for sun, especially in the context of Suhrawardi having written a hymn or a litany to the sun, in which he addresses the sun as a divine object with the Old Persian term Hawraksh or Huraksh. So using a not even modern Persian, but Middle Persian or ancient Persian form of the term sun, probably with some Zoroastrian connotations. Also given the fact that he names the various Platonic forms with ancient Persian names, so the Zoroastrian angels are used as terms to refer to the various intelligible entities, etc. pp. Just as a footnote, speaking of etymologies, and
yeah, no, that's very, very
Suhrawardi may here or there have used some ancient Persian terms, and there's probably something to explore in that regard as well.
That's very, very interesting. I mean, I was very much interested in how, in the story of these two, the other two cities, Jabris and Jabilka, and actually have an article forthcoming now in Dar Islam. So I was very surprised to see that he put them in this 8th climb.
If you read Persian, I can send you several secondary sources on those names and probable etymologies or meanings in case you're interested for your article.
Actually, my Persian exists, but
if you're interested, I'm happy. We can stay in contact. I can take a look at them and maybe I can make some suggestions. Because there's a whole debate going on in Persian scholarship on where those
unfortunately, my paper is on now. It will come out very soon, so I don't have time to.
Okay, I will read it.
Add anything, but I mean, if you saw it and send anything to correct it, and publish anything to correct it, I would be delighted.
Thank you. So
there is a question about what Greek books did Suhrawardi read. I don't know. Did he? I mean, I think it's evident that he read some translations of Plotinus, for instance, but not in Greek, some Arabic translation. So he had knowledge of some Greek literature, Neoplatonist literature. This is evident. And then, I don't remember. He might have read his Aristotle, as everybody, in translation. Okay, I don't know if he knew the Greek. I wouldn't think so.
Well, but there are English translations of his works, I suppose, or French, or in what
Yes,
language?
there are, and studies. He's very well studied, although, okay, for instance, there is a very influential study by Henri Corbin, but Corbin was, he was a bit like these anthropologists who become so much enthralled with their object that they go very well into it. So Corbin as well seems to have believed in this ontology. So he's very imaginative in his explanations and descriptions of al-Suhrawardi. No, there is a quite a literature on al-Suhrawardi, which I don't claim to know well. Okay.
Well, but in any case, to me, you have given many reasons to study him. He seems really fascinating.
Yes, no, for your project, absolutely.
Yes. So, are there any more questions or comments or remarks, or shall we? Oh, yes, there is something, I think. Okay, he quotes the Aeneid. Yes, Castra. This is why probably I think he's fascinating. So if there are no more questions, then let us thank Marinos again for this really great talk, and Marinos and everyone for the discussion that was really very, very, very interesting.
Thank you. The pleasure was all mine. I hope I somehow was an adequate speaker to an audience of students of philosophy.
Has
I'm
been great.
intimidated by this subject, so I hope I.
We are intimidated too, I think, from your topic. So let me just remind that the next talk will be on the 17th of April. It is necessary that the good always has evil as its contrary. Proclus and Simplicius on Plato's Theaetetos 176a by Professor Carlos Steele. So hopefully see you in a couple of weeks, in a few days. Marino, thank you very much again.
You're welcome. Thank you all.
Have a wonderful evening. Thank you. Bye.